Hi, welcome to the Raw Raw podcast. I'm Lauren. Today on the show, I spoke with Lindsay Guichard and we talked about the subjects of anxiety and depression and how to support those you know who might be going through that, how to find support for this for yourself, and also how to talk to your children and teenagers about the subject. One thing I really liked about my conversation with Lindsay was Lindsay's approach to the subject, which is a lot of talking it out and supporting the person. She also gave, really tangible tips and tricks on how to talk to your teenager about this. And also, I really like that she had an optimistic point of view in discussing the subject. One of the things she did say in the interview was that anxiety and depression are treatable. And I really liked that, she had that attitude and that she'd seen that before in her practice. All right, let's get to the show. Hi, I'm Lauren, and welcome to the show. My guest today is Lindsay Guichard. Lindsay is a caring, people-oriented therapist who lives in California with her husband and two boys, aged 9 and 6. For the past 10 years, and between having children, Lindsay has been providing mental health services in California. Her practice services those who struggle with anxiety, loneliness, and relational disconnect. She is also the creator of a mental health blog that she began 3 years ago. Each week, she covers common topics that come up in therapy. Examples include marriage, anger, love, confidence, communication, money, depression, and anxiety. Today, I have asked Lindsay to join me to talk about mental health, mainly on the subjects of depression and anxiety. Thanks so much for joining me today, Lindsay.
Thanks so much for having me. This is so great.
It is great. So before we get into, the big topics at hand today, depression and anxiety, can you tell me a little bit about yourself first and how you got involved in mental health?
Absolutely. So for me, one of the things that was a little bit stressful when I was a senior in high school was what was I going to do with my life? And before I wanted to go to college, I wanted to know I wanted to be on a track. I wanted to know exactly what I was going to college for. And so what I ended up doing was taking a year off and going into a nonprofit job. And part of that nonprofit job was kind of like the promotion was the year of discovery. So it was a bunch of personality tests, a bunch of work aptitude tests, and one of the things that I found was that there was a list of things that I could possibly do. There was teacher, there was like career counselor, there was captain of ship, and then there was therapist or counselor for mental health. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I think I want to see what that is all about. So I ended up deciding to go through all of the schooling for mental health to become a counselor. And that's where we bring up now to speed. It's just along the way, we got educated more and more on what it was going to take to actually get licensed. And so that's where I am now, a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Wow. So it seems to me like you had a natural inclination to be a teacher or be of service to others in some way.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm really interested in talking about, anxiety and depression because a lot of people that I know have struggled with that. And I think it seems to be a fairly common thing, especially in today's society. Right now, we're recording this in May, which is during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. So it seems as though, a lot of that is also even more heightened, or at least coming to the forefront than it was, even previously. So a lot of the work that you do involves anxiety. So can you explain what anxiety is exactly?
Sure. So what I've come to believe is there's some event, something that happens to us maybe in early childhood or even in adulthood, and it's it's a it's a situation that inflicts a fear response. And For whatever reason, when someone has ongoing anxiety, that fear response is something that never leaves, even when our bodies are telling us that that threat is no longer present. So even though we're telling our minds we're safe, we don't need to panic, we don't need to sweat, we don't need to, flee. For some reason, our biochemistry is telling us that all of those things still need to be on board in order for us to just simply maintain our daily lives. And so a lot of people who struggle with anxiety specifically, they experience long, drawn out periods of time where they're at a heightened sense of fear. And one of the things that is very common in someone who struggles with anxiety is they have a tendency to live very small because their anxiety is telling them that the world at large on any given Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday is not safe. So when you see someone who's struggling with anxiety, they have a number of different things that they do on a daily basis that seem strange, but in their mind is telling them that what they're doing is actually quite reasonable. And so if someone in your family is complaining about, the weather, or they're complaining about not knowing what shirt to wear because they're agonizing over a certain shirt, or they're having a hard time even just going to the grocery store, that symptom is what we're seeing, and there's no reason for that symptom to be there. But when you ask, so why is this important to you, and what is it about the situation that's telling you that you're not safe, that's when we start to question the behaviors of anxiety and actually start to tease out, oh, I know this symptom is present. I know that this is what habit my brain is telling me is helping me survive, but it actually is not, it's not serving me anymore. And there was a point, and that's where we get to kind of figure out what point, maybe in childhood or in early development, or what point as an adult, was that specific thing that you're doing, when did that make sense? And why is it still sticking around? And what is it that we can put in place to help counteract your thoughts of unsafety?
No, it's interesting because I've never really thought about it as being a habit or a learned behavior that you just tend to be kind of used to. So you create that over and over. Do you think that you have to go back to the cause to figure out what that is? Or can you implement, practices in your present moment to kind of negate those learned behaviors? Because some people might not want to try to dissect and go through years of, maybe potentially grief or, where they're uncomfortable, as opposed to just trying to neutralize the energy now. Is that even a possibility?
There's benefits to that. So the only thing that I would say why it would behoove someone to go back and figure out where it started was that even if you do put into place those things that could help curtail the effects of the anxious behavior, at any given time, at any given day, even though you've put new habits into place, if you don't recall the root of where it came from, the external triggers can happen at any time. So like, for instance, I'll just go back to, if someone has a very anxious reaction to a fear of water, and they do not know why or where that came from, they just know every time that they're around water, they have the, the cortisol levels rise, the panicky feeling, the hard time breathing, and everybody around them seems to be having such a grand old time around a swimming pool. They can do some things that can help them calm their reactions. But if they're not able to say, oh, just so you know, when I was 6, I was in a pool and I almost drowned, like,
Yeah.
oh, well, like that gives them and everybody around them the root cause. And then it makes sense. Oh, okay, what would make, and everybody can be understanding around, okay, so that makes sense. If and they're able to put themselves in the shoes of the person to help kind of rally around them. Whereas if they say, and they can say, I just have a plain fear of water, and people say like, okay, it's the meaning of the understanding around it. And if the meaning is somewhat something that someone doesn't want to share with the public, like say it's a trauma that they want to keep private, at least the person knows, oh, well, like I have a personal trauma, and they're able to stand in that confidence that even if they were to have an anxious trigger at any given time, they're able to stand in that confidence of, this is who I am. I had something happen to me. It doesn't define me as a person. I do have some residual, things that maybe someone else who didn't go through this trauma would have had. But I'm able to stand firm in that I'm working on it. I'm recovering from it. And I know that these things that my brain are telling me are not serving me today. They're able to separate themselves from the root cause.
Have you ever been able to, or not been able to find the root cause, where somebody just has anxiety, but you're not able to determine the root cause of it?
So sometimes we find that the root cause is merely that it's from their family tree. They've realized that their mom has experienced anxiety, their grandma has experienced anxiety, and that is the root cause. There's no actual event that's caused it. They just know of an event that made the symptoms show most, which could be traumatic all in itself. So sometimes it's the root cause is biochemistry.
So can a happy person also suffer from anxiety? And, I think sometimes we can get bouts of anxiety. Like for me, sometimes if I have too much coffee, I can feel anxious. Are there sort of different levels of anxiety?
There are definitely different levels. And actually, that's something to note that I don't think a lot of people realize is every mental health person is somewhere along a scale. So there is this similar type. So like, speaking of an example for like, if someone realizes that they're, bipolar 1 versus bipolar 2, there's specific criteria that needs to be present. But even everybody in that specific section would be on a scale, and they would be experiencing different symptoms at different intensities. So that saying everybody's different is true, but at the same time, they're at least able to classify and break it down into things that could be helpful.
Right. And so you can still have, normal emotions like happiness, but with bouts of anxiety mixed in. And from what you've just said, you're basically saying that when people are dealing with mental health, there's sort of almost a pattern that people tend to have depending on how they're categorized, I suppose. Not that you want to put people in a box, but in general.
Yeah, more along the lines of not to be identified as such, but more, there's something that I'm experiencing that is causing stress and is getting in the way of daily tasks or daily life, and it's causing me distress. And that's where someone walks into the office is, well, actually, the reason I'm here is because I'm experiencing distress in some area, and it's affecting me. It's affecting my daily life. It's affecting my relationships. I can't do what other people seem to do quite easily. And I don't understand the struggle. And I'm trying to muddle through life, struggling, and people around me don't understand why it's so difficult. And honestly, I don't understand either. Can you please help me to have the wording to be able to connect with my people?
Yeah. When do you think is there a fine line between
a natural amount of anxiety and fear. So for example, if you're in a situation where maybe there is some sort of a danger, or for me, I had an incident when I was 7 where I had a bird sit on my head, which doesn't sound like it's a big deal, but unfortunately for me, it's made me very skittish around birds. And so I've had to work for years and years and years to kind of almost curtail and work through that. So sometimes, if I'm surrounded, let's say, by birds, then that might cause me to feel anxious. However, that's not something that I have ever considered, working with anyone on. So is there kind of a healthy, example of dealing with anxiety, and then maybe an unhealthy way, or is all anxiety bad?
So anxiety anxiety would be classified into different sections. So what you are describing more is in terms of a phobia to a specific object or person or place or thing. And if we are talking about generalized anxiety, that's anxiety in a multitude of areas. And another good thing to note when someone is looking for a diagnosis is the amount of time someone has that anxiety response. If we're talking about generalized anxiety for many different areas, and same with depression. So like for instance, we're able to pretty much differentiate between depression from grief of a loss versus depression that's ongoing simply by looking at the symptoms and the amount of time someone's experiencing the symptoms. So for instance, for depression, if we've got, 5 or 6 out of a line of different symptoms, specifically commonly known for depression, if someone is experiencing those consistently past 6 months, that's when we start to say, okay, you now are no longer, we're going to be grieving for a long time, but it's these intense symptoms. So we're not looking at grief anymore. We're moving away from the grief diagnosis to now more into the depression diagnosis. And what are these things that are still present after this amount of time, that it's like one of the things is they're still having difficulty finding joy in the things that they used to have joy in, that has nothing to do with the loss. And it's just something in a different area of life. So I hope that explained that one.
So I guess what I got from that is, if there are patterns, maybe continuous patterns, maybe over prolonged periods of time that aren't classified as quote unquote maybe normal, then you would start to see that there is a bit of an issue, where if there's like an outside force, that's a fleeting example, as opposed to dealing with a consistent pattern or habit of feeling anxiety or depression. Is that kind of right?
Yeah. And taking the example of COVID, when there's an outside something happening and the whole population is experiencing anxiety, that's normal. Right? That's
right.
Okay. So we're all experiencing anxiety, and maybe some people aren't, and that's okay too. That's not necessarily not normal, especially if a lot of things in their life did not get changed from COVID, but still, there's still an element probably of, fear for loved ones whose lives are changing. But so we'll all be experiencing anxiety at different degrees. But at the same time, we do have this huge thing that's not usually there. Yeah. So that's something that I'm explaining to clients is like, I would love to talk about COVID, and I do talk about COVID. It's just, we do need to be careful not to stay too long, because we're all experiencing this. And I want to make sure that in our sessions, we're able to process what's going on. But we have to be mindful, like I'm struggling with COVID too as a clinician. So I want to make sure that we are spending time processing it, but also we're getting on to the things that we were working on maybe
before.
Before, yeah.
Yeah, because in a way it could almost distract you from the amount of like the work you were getting done and the other sort of issues that might be lingering for that client.
For sure. And sessions are very much client led, but at the same time, clinicians are, encouraged to be kind of, I would say, active listeners. So that's where it comes in, where we're able to, we want to be mindful of where the client is, but also we want to make sure that the session is moving along.
Yeah. Yeah. So how is anxiety different from depression? And can you have one without the other?
I would say that they're more like cousins, because with anxiety, you're going to experience a heightened level of energy. And when you do experience heightened level of energy for a prolonged period of time, our bodies naturally need to replenish. And so in the act of our bodies replenishing, we actually lose a lot of our energy. So the depression part is when we're in a state of low energy for a prolonged period of time. So it would be kind of in waves. So we'll have a high peak of anxiety, and we'll have it for as long as our body will let us. And then maybe we wake up and we almost experience somewhat of a hangover type scenario where we're recovering from our anxiety peak, and that might be more of a depression episode.
Right. So why is it that some people suffer from depression over other people? So I guess I don't know a lot about this stuff, but when I hear about depression, I do think about low energy, sadness, numbness. Those are kind of my assumptions about it. Why is it that some people suffer from that and other people don't?
I recently saw a quote that said, depression has nothing to do with our character. It has to do with our chemistry. So that would be our body chemistry. So I'm looking just at a definition right now, just to make sure that I'm saying this correctly. But it seems that we have a biochemical, a psychological, and a social source of distress. So that is any mixture of those three things. That it's, if you think about it as like a perfect recipe for someone to have an experienced depression, we have just the right amount of biochemical and psychological and social sources that is making just the right combination for us to struggle. And one of the things that is just a huge indication of that, the fact that we have that perfect combination to struggle, is that we have been known to love something, and we've been known to choose something that lifts our spirits. And whenever we feel down, we go to that thing, and it never fails. It always lifts our spirits. And then all of a sudden we start going to that thing, and we actually don't have the same lifting of spirit. We used to love music, and we no longer get the same sense of loving. We used to love jogging, and we never want to jog anymore because it just doesn't give us the same feeling as it used to. And then the next question that I would ask is, how long have you been feeling this way? And if they've been saying 6 months or longer, that's when I go, okay, we have to examine. There's a biochemical something going on. Mm-hmm. There's something psychologically that we're telling ourselves that's just keeping us down. There's something socially that's happened that has convinced us that we are no longer the person who we once thought we were.
So I see what you mean. And you bring up the 6 month period, because that's kind of a time for people to almost work it out or
Yeah.
establish
Yes.
there's an issue.
Yes.
Right. So how common are mental health issues in people today? I know we talked about the fact that obviously dealing with the COVID pandemic, there are issues with anxiety that everyone's having, which is normal, but that wouldn't be what is a mental health issue, right?
So the the stat I am seeing right in front of me is that more than 3 million US cases per year are happening, and that's just in the US, and that's a lot of cases.
Yeah, that's a
So,
lot.
and that's for clinical depression, and I think that when we start to look at the numbers and we start to realize how common it actually is, it it makes it so that the stigma can start to decrease of if I'm actually struggling and if I'm actually having a hard time, and there are people I can talk to and things that I can do. And that's one of the things that I keep reading over and over and over again, is that anxiety and depression are treatable. And I know that because that's my profession. But the thing that I need to remember to keep communicating to people is, if we're finding that us by ourselves are not able to alleviate these symptoms and they are affecting us in a negative way on a daily basis, how long do we want to choose to struggle by ourselves? Is there a way that we can just quickly kind of either find those things that are going to at least alleviate the symptoms, and that could be for depression, regular exercise, eating healthy, making sure that we're getting enough sleep, not too much, and making sure that we're having contact with the people that we love and care about, and making sure that we're trying new things, because if the things that we used to love, for instance, are growing stale, we do have to make sure that it's not just that we're getting older and we just like new things. Like if I don't like
Yeah.
a certain type of music, it's because I don't like the music I used to like when I was 6 years old. So that we're making sure that we're learning new things and trying new things so that we can rule depression out.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because I mean, sometimes you do change as a person. You can
That's
fall
right.
out of love with someone that you're in a relationship with. You can move on from friends.
That's right.
I don't like that food anymore. I like that now.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And so that's the thing. Any research we do about ourselves, if we have people around us that we can talk to about it, like, yeah, do you remember when I really used to love country music and I was a country nut and now I love folk instead? Like, is that like how like it's just being able to bounce off the people that we love is very important, because one of the things that happens when we're struggling from mental health is that sometimes we're blind to it, and we need to be able to ask the people around us, have I been moody lately? Have I been tired, like excessively tired too much? And that's something that we can that out actually is another step to seeking help with a mental health professional, because we can ask, like, I haven't really noticed it, but my mother has noticed that I don't love these things, or whenever she's asking me to go out with her, I always resist, and I used to not resist at all, and I didn't think that maybe a job loss or the loss of a loved one was affecting me past the grieving part, but I think it actually is. So it's just a part of researching of, do I need help?
I guess you have to be self-aware enough too, because sometimes people might be going through these things and thinking it's normal, or, not recognize that it's been going on for over 6 months. So they might not realize that there's this habit that's been formed. So do you have any tips or tricks on how to approach the subject of dealing with someone like that, or approaching the, how you would carefully ask them if they're okay without, I don't know, seeming like you're creating something out of nothing?
I would say the best way, if you're noticing, I'll just say, if you're noticing a friend who seems to have gone through a lot of changes, either because of a specific something that's happened to them in their life, or a loss, and you've noticed that it's been a really long time. It doesn't necessarily have to be 6 months, but it's been a really long time, and they seem almost like a different person, and you're every time you see them, you seem, or you have this desire to ask them what's wrong. And if you haven't seen them happy, you haven't seen them laugh, and they're your friend who you hang out quite a bit, one of the first things that I would ask would be, or something that I would say is, I've noticed you are down quite a bit ever since this time. Is there something that I can do to help you? Or is there someone you want me to help you call to see if you need any help? Basically, it's something along the lines of, I've noticed this about you, and I don't know if you want to continue to be this way, but if there's something that I can do to help support you to alleviate the sadness, let me know. So the decision to see a provider, until it gets to the point where they're going to be harming themselves or others, that is that is going to be onto their responsibility to actually reach out and call, unless they say, I have a fear, and this is very legit, I have a fear of calling people I don't know. If I give you the number, friend, can you call and schedule the appointment for me? Just that first one, because as soon as I meet the person, I'm going to be fine. But because I have this fear of calling people that I don't know, it's making it so that I can't go see the mental health professional that I actually really am desperate to see.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess it's asking, and then it's shutting up and listening.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Accusing someone, or being desperate for someone to be like they used to be, and basically you're going to end the friendship if they don't change, that stuff is not helpful. But if we come at it in the term of, how can I help support you in this? I notice that you're struggling. If this is how, if is there anything that I can do to help you get the help that you need? Let me know, and kind of leave it as an open door. They know who to come to when it is that time to say, what, something happened, and I think the conversation we had last month, I think I'm going to take you up on that. It might not be just because I bring it up, they're going to take me up on it right away.
Mm-hmm.
But at least they know that you are there to support them when they do decide to make that appointment and whatever it is they need. But there also are those activities, like I said, like the exercising regularly, and that's another support. That's something that we can do. Is we notice that someone's down, we can call them up and say, like, hey, let's go for a social distance walk, on Monday and Thursday every week, whatever it is, because that's one of the things that we can do to alleviate depression.
Yeah.
And it's something that we can do to help get rid of that extra energy that anxiety provokes. Is we just go on a run when we feel super anxious. We just go on a run, and that extra energy that anxiety brings up starts to go away.
Right. So I know you have a couple of kids, and they're not teenagers yet, but one thing that I've heard a lot about, and I'm sure you have as well, is sort of the effect of social media on a lot of our teenagers and youth these days, which is causing a lot of anxiety and potentially depression as well. And maybe not even just social media, but just outside factors in general, not to mention all the challenges you deal with in a growing body and hormones and all that kind of stuff. Do you have any suggestions for how any parents listening might be able to approach the subject of mental health and, kind of reaching out to their children or teenagers if they are having issues? Because sometimes teenagers don't actually want to confide in their parents. Do you have any advice around that?
Yes. So, depending on where you are in your relationship with your teenager, I've heard it said that they tend, and this is not just teenagers, but anybody who is experiencing a bunch of hormones, they have a tendency to be nicer and more receptive to people who they respect and trust at the moment. So if you as a parent are not the person that they would go to right away for talking about anything, and that is completely normal, I would suggest talking to that person that the teenager knows, loves, and trusts at the moment, and talking to them about what you are noticing in your teen, and then basically having a conversation with that person who the teen is receptive toward, and saying, hey, have you been noticing these things? These are some things that are concerning us here at home. I just want you to know that if you ever have a conversation with my teen, is there any way you can basically have that same conversation that we had before when we weren't talking about a teen, where it's like, hey, just so you know, like, I'm here to support you. There's that thing that happened a little while ago. Know that if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. And I have this friend who I know, like, and trust, who is a therapist, and they would love to kind of set up an appointment with you. So that's a way to do it. It's kind of a back alley way, and I can see where if a parent is of a teen, they just can't think of anybody like that, that the teen knows, likes, and trusts. You can look to social media for certain
Influencers, maybe.
Yeah, influencers, but at thinking about it, it's those speakers, those authors, those people who have a special gift with talking to teens.
Yeah.
And if they are promoting something that is mental health based, that's all the more wonderful.
Yeah.
So whether it's a book that they can read or a video that they can watch on mental health, if you are able to refer out instead of you talking to your teen, it's a little bit better because they won't have the walls up.
Yeah.
When you start going to your teen and you start telling them everything that you're noticed, that's when the walls go up, and it's a harder conversation.
Right. Defensiveness creeps in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So one thing that I noticed that you kind of keep coming back to is talking things out. So as a therapist, that's primarily what you do, right? You talk things out, you do a lot of active listening, you listen. What do you think are some of the benefits of talking things out? And does that ever, work well with medication? Because sometimes talking things out might not be enough.
So as a therapist, when there's a client in my session, whenever I'm talking to them, especially when I first meet them, I'm constantly assessing where they're at. And if I hear something, they call it red flags. If I hear a red flag and I'm able to decipher, oh, this is a conversation that this person needs to have with a psychiatrist, and that would be a medication conversation. then I would refer the client out to the psychiatrist. But they do say that talk therapy and medication together is a very successful way to go about these things. And so basically what happens is I get the client to sign a release of information, and then instead of it just being me and the client talking, it's actually the client talking to me, the client having a meeting with a psychiatrist, and it's me, the therapist, collaborating with the psychiatrist so that we are all on the same page. And if there's any symptoms that are coming up, me and the psychiatrist are talking about that to make sure that the care that the person has is working the best.
Right. So in that being said, what else do you think is the responsibility of a therapist? Because if you're talking about a team now, do you start to notice whether or not the client is improving, whether or not the decisions that the third party, the psychiatrist is making, are those decisions working for the client? Like, what's the responsibility for the therapist in that scenario?
So the responsibility for the clinician would be to, as soon as they find out that the client has seen the psychiatrist, the clinician will contact the psychiatrist and ask, what kind of medications are they trying out? And B, what are the things that the clinician can be looking for when the client is in session that would be something that's not quite right, and that I would need to re-refer back to the psychiatrist. So basically, the psychiatrist would be filling the clinician in on any red flags or warning signs. They would also be doing that with the client themselves when they are trying the medication route. Now, that's not the answer for everybody, and there are a lot of clients who come in and say that they've gone to a psychiatrist and they've tried the medication route, and they are adamantly against it for whatever reason. And with that, that's just a different conversation between the client and the clinician, and then we start talking about other things that they could possibly do. So for instance, if we're talking about someone who's struggling with depression, we would just do some research, both of us, the client and the clinician. We would do some research, and then we would share the next session of some tips that they could do that might alleviate some of the symptoms. Now, if the symptoms do persist after we've tried all of those non-medication options, that would be up to the clinician to bring up and to say, I know that you have been adamantly opposed to medication, but we've tried everything else. I'm wondering if the last experience you had with a psychiatrist, they just didn't quite get the right combination for you. Do you want a referral for a different psychologist who maybe, or a different psychiatrist who maybe has a different methodology or that kind of thing? So we're constantly, I would say, troubleshooting what is the best for the client.
Mm-hmm. So how do you recommend people choose a therapist? Because it's quite possible that, much like your last description, that maybe they had a therapist that wasn't the right fit for them, and maybe they didn't spend enough time, hashing out the root causes, or maybe they weren't supported the way that they wanted to, which kind of possibly has tainted the experience. So how do you recommend that people choose a therapist and, essentially get the courage to maybe try it again if they have already and it didn't go so well?
So one of the areas that I have in my background is of recovery from addiction. And one of the things that is highly recommended when we go to a support group is to try it for, they say to try it for 6 times. But the thing is, for a recovery group, that is free. And it is something that is, you do not have to commit to. But with a therapist, it is not free, and you do have to commit. So I would say that if there is not a sense of connection with you and the therapist at hand with the first session, you have to be able to want to come back to the session. So if the therapist for some reason is not communicating something that is just what you need in order to say, if you ask yourself, that was fine, but I really don't see that me and this person have a connection. I don't get a sense that they care, and I don't really want to come back. That's a good indication to not go back and to try a new therapist, because that therapist that is going to communicate that they care and that they are there for you and that they are committed to your mental health, they're out there. And so I would encourage anybody who's tried therapy before and it just didn't fit, that therapists are just people. So we're just looking for that person who we can connect with. And the thing, if you are able to answer, actually, yes, I do want to come back for session 2, that is a good indicator that you've found somebody who, at least for a little bit of time, is going to be your mental health professional. Mm-hmm. And that's not saying that your mental health professional will not say something that you don't like, because we oftentimes do, just in the nature of the relationship. But what it does mean is that if you can answer that basic, I honestly believe that this person, even though they're not going to say everything that I like, that they have my mental health as a priority. And I feel it. I feel it just being in the room, that they're there for me. And I think that that's the person that that is a good fit, at least for a time. And one of the things that mental health providers, are encouraged and are taught is that we are trying to work ourselves out of a job. We are trying to make sure that everybody that we see gets whatever symptoms that they're experiencing that is harming them in their daily life or affecting them negatively. We are trying to alleviate symptoms just like a medical doctor would. And so we keep that in our minds when we see our clients. We want to make sure that we are doing everything we possibly can to, as effectively as we can, alleviate our client's symptoms, so that another time they will be able to say, you know what, I think I can do this. I think I'm ready to, some clinicians call it graduation. I think I'm ready to graduate. What we're taught in school is it's called termination. But that's what clinicians are doing. We're there to meet people where they're at. We're there to help alleviate symptoms and get them the best combination for their mental health. And then we're working towards graduation or termination. And if you get that sense when you're in the session with someone that's their goal, then I think for a time they're your person. And there also are a lot of clinicians who deal with different things. So at any given time, you can have a family therapist, you can have an individual therapist, you could have a marriage counselor. I mean, and within those different types, they specialize in different things. So like for me, I'm an individual counselor who specializes in anxiety, and a cousin of anxiety is depression. And I, with all the background, it's for me, it's an ideal client is someone who needs help alleviating the symptoms that is causing distress in their daily life from those things.
Yes, well said. So, do you have any? I know you talked a bit about how, anxiety and depression is treatable. And, we kind of worked through the fact that there's a big stigma around, people not seeking help or not knowing how common it is. Do you have any success stories that kind of stick out in your mind of people that have graduated with you?
Oh, sure. So the success story would become so I'm going to keep it generalized just because one of the things that people don't realize is how confidential sessions are, and clinicians take that very seriously. One of the things that we can't do, which is very interesting in sharing our services, is we will never be able to give your personal story unless we have a signed consent, and it's to another provider of like, say, your doctor or your psychiatrist. So that makes marketing quite challenging, if you could imagine that. So
I'm really good. Just
general,
ask me.
right. So keeping it general, what we do as a client and clinician is we collaborate on what our goals are in session. So after, I would say, one or two sessions, we're pretty clear on what successful treatment looks like, you and me. And so we don't graduate until those things have come to pass. And so there are some things that I get to put into a treatment plan that would be, that I'll be sharing with the client, that are indicators of success and time to graduate. And so one of the things that clients get nervous about is the unknown. So basically, if a client is resisting graduation, which I don't know any high schooler who resists graduation, and so that's why I like using graduation instead of termination, is because graduation is such a propelling word, right? If resistance is coming up, it is up to the clinician to encourage the client. You know what? We have these markers of success. We have evidence that you've been able to do these successful markers for a prolonged period of time. And we're going to do something really special for your graduation. And so the clinician is able to tell the client that as soon as they see graduation in sight. And the hope by doing that is so that there's no surprises, right? And so that everybody's preparing for graduation at the same time. So I would say the success that I've seen with my clients is that there is a beginning, there is a middle, and there is a clear end. And another way that I like to describe that as an arc. So there are some clients who do the beginning, the middle, and the end, and they graduate. And then there are some clients who do the beginning, the middle, and the end of an arc, and then something happens, and they start a new arc. And so we do the beginning, middle, and end of a new arc. And so I've got both of those experiences, and I like to, even though it's abstract and it's generalized, I like to make it as clear as possible to everyone of where they are in terms of progress. And so,
yeah, because sometimes on the one step at a time is enough. If you're moving in the right direction, that's the whole point.
Correct. Yeah. So it's okay to zoom out and to zoom back in again when we're looking at the arc. Like, oh, okay, like we're either at the middle and then we zoom back in, and then we're at this next step. But everybody in the room of the session knows what goals we are working toward.
Yeah.
And then when the closing of an arc is happening, that's when a new treatment plan is either developed or we have a graduation.
Yeah, I love that. So can you tell me a little bit about your new membership, The Gathering Place? Is that something that you sort of started recently?
Yes, it was my response to what can I do? What can I do to kind of help people get reconnected if if they're feeling disconnected in social distancing and COVID specifically? And so this is not therapy. This is a reconnection membership that I put together mental health monthly bundles for everybody who is a member. And so at this point, if you come into the membership, it's all about what you'll be getting in terms of mental health bundle resources. And and I'm not your clinician. So it's a very different it's a very different position for me in terms of I am the person who gathers the materials, and I talk to you in a consultation, and we decide like, oh, I'm struggling with anxiety this month. Oh, I'm struggling with patience this month. Oh, I'm struggling with this, that, and the other thing. And I get to pull together a bundle for you and then give it to you privately, and you get to consume it at your leisure. So that's what it is. It's just kind of an extension of being able to share mental health education when without boundaries of if you wanted therapy services from me, there are some criteria. So if you wanted therapy services from me, you would need to live in California, and that you know, as we're coming to realize, California, even though it is huge, it's small when you have regular connections with people that don't live in California. So this is something that I can provide to everybody.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll put a link for that in the show notes as well for our listeners who are interested in finding out more. So just before we wrap up, can you tell me what you love most about your job?
I love the people. I'm very in my description. I'm people oriented, so I love connecting with people, and it never surprises me how much it actually fills me up to connect with people and to be of service.
Yeah. Well said. So I know that you've taken the time, and thank you for that, Lindsay, to put together a whole list of really positive and powerful resources. I'll put all the links to those in the show notes. Anything else that you wanted to leave our listeners with today that I might not have mentioned?
Be safe. Reach out for help if you're feeling any distress, and take care of each other.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed talking to you, definitely giving me some things to think about. And I love that, you've really kind of given hope to people who at home might be listening and thinking that, there isn't a light at the end of the tunnel. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's up for you to take the step forward, and also really helpful tips and tricks on how to talk to those who we know who might be suffering and not getting the kind of help that they need. So thank you for that, Lindsay.
Thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
It's great. Thanks.
Thank you so very much for listening. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a review in iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and share it with your friends.